or ME 2016.
And I will
Okay, we're unmuted now.
you. And are we unmuting?
Yes, they should be able to hear us. It says we're unmuted.
Okay. Doug, can you hear me? Are you muted?
I'm unmuted now.
Good, thank you. I'm glad we can hear you, so you can hear us okay?
Yes, coming in loud and clear.
Great. Okay, well, I'm gonna go ahead and get Philip started here so that we can get moving. Soren is not here yet, but,
Oh, he's online now.
oh, he's online?
He's here.
Oh, okay. So welcome, Soren. We are here today for the final defense of Philip Steigerwald. And Philip has been working for quite a while on this and has developed a decision model for adaptive management and application of that. And so he's going to present that today. It's about a 50-minute presentation, and so we'll just let you know about the time to expect. Go ahead and shut the door, Philip, and since they're both on, we'll shut it and that'll reduce distractions. And I'll turn it over and you can go ahead.
Well, good morning and howdy. Thank you all for attending and listening to me talk. So my dissertation has been on management of woody plant encroachment, and I've developed decision theory, ecological theory, and then we'll look at some evaluation at the end. So the decision theory I'm calling integrated rangeland management system. The ecological theory is disturbance regime theory. And then lastly, we're going to look at a case study utilizing these concepts. So what is woody plant encroachment and what are the causes of it? Well, woody plant encroachment is the increase in density, cover, and biomass of woody or shrubby plants. The hypothesized drivers of woody plant encroachment include climate change, fire suppression, altered herbivory, increased atmospheric CO2 and nitrogen deposition. But if you look at these, the only ones that can be controlled at the ranch level is fire and herbivory. The consequences of woody plant encroachment really begin with altered ecosystem services. So it's changing where and how carbon is stored. So it's moving from below ground to above ground pools. It's changing the hydrology. And as these grasslands are being encroached, the biodiversity is being affected as well, as you're losing these grassland habitats and savannas. With this change, we're seeing a decrease in extracted products that people use, such as livestock, and in some cases, changes in the wildlife habitat as well. To get a better understanding of this, we need to look at what was here before settlement and to get an idea of how these rangelands functioned. So the area in North America was primarily a mosaic of grasslands and savannas with some wooded areas that was generally along topography, and these were driven at a broad scale by climate, soils, and in topography. We have records from explorers such as Randolph Marcy. He reported, "Not a tree, shrub, or any other object, either animate or inanimate, relieved the dreaded Llano Estacado." Since these explorers, we've seen a shift in the land use patterns and scale of those patterns. We've seen herbivory shift from migratory multi-species grazing to enclosed single species grazing. And we've seen fire change as well. It has gone from frequent fire shifting on the landscape to active suppression with a reduction of fine fuels caused by the change in grazing. So it makes sense that woody plant encroachment has emerged under this system of changes in these patterns, because it has changed resource allocation. So who gets the light wins. And this really I see as evidence that rangelands are disturbance-driven ecosystems. With these changes, we can really see that there's two types of management regimes. We have static and dynamic. The historical regimes for these areas was dynamic. You had migratory grazing, frequent fire, drought-coupled animal populations, so there was a dynamic system moving across the landscape. Whereas our traditional system since the 1880s is very much static. We is characterized by integrated fencing, water development, supplemental feeding, fixed stocking rates, fire suppression, and similar things. And because of the increase of woody plants, we've attempted to mitigate it, and traditional management has done this through treatments, such as mechanical, such as chaining, chemical, spraying herbicides, biological, such as the cactoblastic moth. But however, there's an issue with this. Besides the ecological effects being different, they're not as cost effective as you would like them to be. In most cases, for traditional treatments, the gain that you would arrive from implementing that treatment in a financial sense is outweighed by the cost. We begin to see a transition towards dynamic management, and that really began with integrated brush management system in the 1880s or 1980s. And they developed a system for integrating multiple treatments to maximize economic success and treatment effectiveness. So this really was focused, or IBMS, the integrated brush management system, they were focused on brush control. It was not a holistic system for the whole system of rangeland management, but treatments of how do you treat and deal with brush. So rangeland management really is a management science. It is translational because it is full of multiple disciplines, from animal ecology to range science to animal health. So quite a number of different disciplines. And as we talk about management science, we have to go back to Forrester, who's the founder of systems dynamics, who's an industrial engineer. And he discussed the interaction of the art and science of management. Forrester. The art develops through empirical experience, but in time ceases to grow because of the disorganized state of its knowledge. Management science develops to explain, organize, and distill experience into a more compact and usable form. As the science grows, it provides a new basis for further extension of the art of management. Management is in transition from an art based only on experience to a profession based on an underlying structure of principles in science. With this in mind, I'd like to look at the difference between traditional science and research and management science. As we see, traditional science involves moving data to information to knowledge, but does not extend farther than knowledge. We need management science to take that knowledge, transform it into wisdom, so that it can be applied to management. And this really can be thought of as an adaptive management cycle. You can begin with what management needs, work your way down to through the science system, so and transform it to have what you want to achieve your management goals. And then you can work back up from data and all the way back up to change management. So it forms a cycle. Let's zoom in on the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is generated from isolated instances. An example of this would be the scientific method, controlled rangeland experiments, where we seek to control part of the system, isolate it down. How does, if we change this one variable, what happens? However, wisdom is different. Wisdom is generated through the application of knowledge in functioning systems, and in the rangeland context, it's the system as a whole system in which wisdom is generated. It's not because you cannot control and have success when you're only isolating one part of the system. I propose we need a new management paradigm. We must move knowledge into wisdom. And to return to this dynamic system, we need to create wisdom from ecological knowledge. To do this, I'm proposing Integrated Rangeland Management System, or IRMS, to facilitate this process. It is a holistic process, so it is not a treatment for management of rangeland systems. The purpose is to create and apply wisdom to management. It serves as a translational interface between scientific knowledge and experiential wisdom. I divided it into 3 planning horizons. First, we have strategic planning, which is your values and objectives. This is why do you manage? And so this is the why that you must answer to know where you're going. Tactical planning is then the prescriptions and regimes. It is how you're going to do your why. And lastly, we have operational implementation. So this is your management and then monitoring the effects of your management. So it is what you are actually doing. So we begin with the model, we begin with strategic visioning. And this begins with management vision. So this is set from outside the process of rangeland management. So the owner or the manager, this is what they want for their property. So they have to know what they want. And then you can build strategic goals that, if accomplished, you'll know that is how you know you've met your vision. And then you have management objectives. And these are concrete, measurable things, such as a 50% reduction in woody plant encroachment would be an example of a management objective. Then we move down. So once you've done the strategic visioning process, we move down to tactical planning. And we begin by analyzing our management objectives to create a disturbance regime. And to do that, we look at our resources. So what do we have now? And what do we want that, if we achieve what we want, it accomplishes our management vision? And you analyze that with the tools available to change your resources by developing a management prescriptions and then contingency plans. Contingency plans are important because life happens and weather will happen and it will not go as you planned. So you must need to be ready for when changes occur. Once you have a designed management regime, you can then implement that regime event by event. And the keystone here that supports this process and what makes it adaptive is monitoring. Because in monitoring, you can change how you implement your regime, such as whenever you're monitoring grazing, you can change, do I move the cows today or do I move them tomorrow, by looking at what's going on in the pasture. And then you can look at the trend of that and say, am I meeting my strategic goals? Am I headed towards my vision? And then you can use it to inform your tactical planning. So when you update your regime plan, you can say, did this work? Did this not work? The key thing within all of this process is strategic thinking. And the structure of this came from strategic military planning, which was originally developed by a Prussian general, Karl von Clausewitz. And I came across his work in a blog, and it struck me as, this is perfect for management. And he was discussing war and strategy in the 1800s. And so I've adapted a quote of his to be modern and address management. Clausewitz: the vision is the goal. Management is the means of reaching it. And the means can never be considered in isolation from their purpose. Management should never be thought of as something autonomous, but always as an instrument of strategy. So this type of thinking, it stresses that your vision guides your management. You don't do management to do management. You do management to achieve your vision. However, you cannot ignore any of these three horizons, because if you're lacking one, it will impact the others. So for RMS, it is a destination, or it is not a destination, it is a process of management. IRMS moves the field of rangeland management from saying do adaptive management to having a structured process for how to do adaptive management. Now let's move to some ecological theory for use within IRMS. So I've developed disturbance regime theory to provide knowledge for application within the IRMS process. So disturbance regime theory qualitatively predicts plant response to disturbance via resistance and resilience to disturbance events. It is the application of disturbance regime theory I'm calling disturbance regime management. IRMS was designed to help managers convert this knowledge into wisdom that they can then apply to their management. And the purpose of disturbance regime management is to create customized disturbance prescriptions that form disturbance regimes that will meet your woody plant encroachment goals. This is done via resistance and resilience of individual populations to predict management effects from a disturbance regime and disturbance events. I've chosen to illustrate this with prescribed fire. Even though there are other disturbances, fire was the predominant disturbance that was kept grasslands as grasslands. Even though to have fire, you must have grazing that allows fire, we're going to focus on the effects of fire. To begin with, a disturbance regime, this is what directs the woody population cover. Then we have disturbance events, and they work through controlling the photosynthetic tissue ratio. So this is the disturbance events determine who gets resources. Resistance are the vegetative features of a population that resist the impact of a disturbance. Then resilience are features that enable recovery following a disturbance. So resistance is a theoretical relationship between a population's innate resistance and the intensity of a specific disturbance operating on that population. And intensity is the qualitative strength of a specific disturbance event. So the key characteristics for resilience include bark resistance. This is features that protect the population from the effects of a fire. You have tissue volatility. So this is if that population sets on fire, is it going to burn readily? Then you have the structure and stature. So this is the population within your fire line and going to be affected by the fire. And lastly, the live fuel moisture. So is that population, is it going to be affected with that fire, with the heat that fire is outputting onto the population? So if we visualize this, we can have the idea of thresholds. On our y-axis, we have resistance, and on our x-axis, we have intensity. So consider point A as a population or species that has moderate resistance, but we're going to compare that to a low intensity disturbance event. So we'll say because resistance exceeds intensity, there will be no effect because it is above that threshold. However, if we increase the intensity to cross that threshold, we move from low intensity all the way up to high intensity, we're moving to impact. So that disturbance will impact that population. Now let's look at resilience. So resilience is the theoretical relationship between a species' dominance and the frequency of impacting disturbance events. And frequency is the qualitative measure of the return interval of impacting disturbance events. So key characteristics for resilience include resprouting ability. So does this plant resprout from the base or below ground following removal? How quickly does this plant reach maturity? So is it old enough that it has the thick corky bark that protects it from a prescribed fire? And we have reproduction maturity. So how long does this plant take for it is mature enough to reproduce? And lastly, if this plant is removed, how does it recover from the seed bank? So we have the same idea of thresholds again, but for resilience. And here, frequency represents those impacting disturbances. So at point A, we have a population that has a moderate resilience, but a low frequency. So we'd say that there, on the long term, that this disturbance regime would have no effect because the frequency is not sufficient. But if you increase your frequency of the disturbance, we can cross that threshold from no impact of our disturbance regime to having an impact of our disturbance regime. Now, instead of looking at every single population and species individually, we want to be able to group species based on how they respond to management. To do this, I'm proposing vegetation response groups. So the vegetation response group is similar species that if a disturbance regime is applied, they will either increase or decrease in the same manner. And the purpose of this is to enable the communication of these ecological concepts to managers. So if we take resistance and resilience and make it a presence or absence matrix, we get 4 classes of species. First, we have resistant and resilient. An example of this would be honey mesquite. It has thick, corky bark that protects it from removal by a prescribed fire. And if it is top killed, it comes back from the base very readily. Then we move to resistant only species. An example of this would be post oak. It has that thick, corky bark, so it is very resilient to a fire. But if it is killed, it does not resprout and has to come back from seed. Then we have resilient species. So these are plants that easily burn, such as McCartney rose. You top kill it in the fall or winter, and in the spring it's regrown already to basically, it seems like the same size. And lastly, we have sensitive species such as ash juniper, where if you have a prescribed fire that goes through there, it'll top kill it very easily, and it does not resprout from the base, and it has to come back from seed. At the top, we have a solid line moving all the way down to a dotted line, and I'll use this as we look at these vegetation response groups in a figure. So this is where you can keep which one is which in your mind. And so solid, resist fire a lot, dotted line, sensitive to fire. So to do this, we have disturbance intensity on our y-axis, and we have disturbance frequency on our x-axis. And so we want to know what happens if you have long-term regimes. So we'll begin with no fire. So the dotted line represents a threshold where that above we have populations that cannot be present, and below you'll have populations that are present. So below this line, with no fire in this photograph, you can see lots of different woody plants and populations. So at no fire, this area is 20 to 30 years since it's had a fire. You can see that you're seeing all types of the vegetation response groups, and the disturbance regime is not limiting what can appear. So if we move again to increase our fire return interval, so now this is an area that's burned up every 10 years, we can see in that photograph something's changed. We're seeing some of the species that are there are not present, so those populations are changing. So we've crossed a threshold where group 4, the sensitive plants, are not present because of the fire regime. And so now we move again, move to a 5-year fire regime interval. Oops. And we see it starting to open up. We're seeing some of those populations are dropping out again. And so just by changing the frequency of the fire, so we've changed the disturbance regime, and it has in turn changed the vegetation response groups. Lastly, let's look at the most frequent we can get for this area. It's a 1 to 2 year fire return interval here in Sonora, Texas, and they're trying to burn every year, but it doesn't always happen. So this one is right on that threshold where you see that there's a few woody plants there, but a lot of that area is now open and is not dominated by any of the woody populations. So it's right on that threshold between the things that are very resistant, resilient, present, and them dropping out of the area completely here. So the takeaway from this figure is that the disturbance regime determines what vegetation response groups are present. So if you know a disturbance regime, you should know what vegetation response groups are present. You should be able to predict that. To facilitate managers in applying resistance and resilience, developed worksheets for estimating resistance. So here we see those same characteristics again. We have bark characteristics going down, and then we have a rating for them. And this is as simple as I could make it as low, moderate, and high. And so we have bark resistance, plant volatility, live fuel moisture, plant stature and structure, and then ladder fuels as things that a manager, if he's implementing prescribed fire, needs to think about are the populations that are going to be present. I've done the same thing for the resprouting species or for resilience. And we begin with resprouting ability. So does this plant resprout? Can we look at competitive ability? So does this plant, is it competitive with the things that are around it if it's reestablishing? And then we look at its maturity. So how long does this plant take to reach maturity? And lastly, I've developed a worksheet for estimating the effects of prescribed fire, or they're estimating the intensity of prescribed fire so that you can then estimate the effects of it. And it's the same system with characteristics going down. Begin with fuel continuity. So you must know what does your fuel look like. Then we look at fuel load. How much fuel is there? Is it sufficient? Then we have live fuel moisture. So what is the moisture content of the species or populations that you're trying to remove? Then we have dead fuel moisture, which is what is the moisture of your fuel bed, of your fine fuels? And then some environmental factors such as wind speed and then topography. So how does this all put together? How does this work? How does a person actually apply this? So we begin with you inventory the woody population. So what populations do I have present on my management unit? And then you need to have a vision or goal for each of those populations. Do I want this population to increase, or do I want it to decrease? Or do I want it just no effect, no change? Once you have a vision for them, you can then rate the resistance and resilience for each of these populations. And once you have that, you can then plan a prescribed fire that will achieve your vision for each of these populations. So you plan your intensity, so how intense of a fire do I need to overcome the resistance of these populations? And then how frequent do I need to come back and return this fire, this disturbance regime, or return this fire? And then you implement. And as you implement, you need to monitor the effects of it. So we move to monitoring. In monitoring, we will have event effect, and then we'll look at the trend. So event effect, so you'll feeds directly back into your planning process. So it just says, was my fire intense enough? Did it cross that threshold? So that's what your monitoring will let you know where your estimation's correct or not. And then once you have multiple events, you can look at the trend. Is the trend of my management unit for each of these populations going where I want it to go, or is it going away from where I want it to go? So our disturbance regime conclusions are that disturbance regime theory translates ecological concepts and principles for woody plant encroachment management. Disturbance regime management is how managers apply disturbance regime theory. And then the resistance and resilience principles are what enable us to plan long-term disturbance regimes that achieve woody plant encroachment goals. So now let's look at some application. So let's look at a case study where these principles were applied. So we worked on the Duncan Spade. It is a working ranch where a prescribed fire disturbance regime was applied to control McCartney Rose encroachment. All prescriptions were based on monitoring data. So we'd implement, monitor the effects, adapt. And then we did that adaptive management cycle in this process. For monitoring, we utilized remote sensing to classify digital images. We used key areas with line transects for woody cover, and then plot photographs at these key areas. So the ranch was a 940-acre unit in Wharton County, Texas. Our primary encroaching species is McCartney Rose. It is a very vigorous evergreen shrub. As you can see in this photograph, it can form dense, mature hedges that will cover an entire pasture. This area would traditionally be a true tallgrass prairie that was dominated by tall and midgrasses such as bluestems, Indian grass, and paspalums like brown seed paspalum. The Spanish camp has two primary management objectives. So this is the Duncan Spade. This is the unit of the Duncan Spade we worked on. And the first is to reduce McCartney Rose cover on the ranch. And second is to do this without continued application of herbicide, because before we started working with the ranch, they were spraying herbicide every year for McCartney Rose control. It began with one pasture that was continuously stocked, the 940 acres. In 2012, we created 5 pastures when we began working with them so we could do rotational grazing to control the fuel bed so that we could do prescribed fire. The grazing was monitored with the grazing manager, and all prescribed burns were conducted during the winter, so between December to February. For the remote sensing, we utilized 1 meter 4-band aerial digital images from the National Agricultural Imagery Program, or NAPE photographs. And these were taken in the summer every 2 years. And it began in 2010 and went all the way to 2018. So these are the photograph series we'll look at. I classified each image using the support vector machine algorithm into pixel classes. And then I combined all the different pixel classes into woody and non-woody so we can easily see what is going on with woody plant encroachment for this ranch. For our ground sampling, we had 15 key areas, and at each key area, we ran 4 100-foot line transects along the cardinal directions, and we took a photograph additionally along each line. So these are the worksheets that I presented previously in disturbance regime theory. the takeaway that I want you to take from here is that McCartney Rose is rated as a 3, so it is low intensity or it is low resistance. And honey mesquite, which is the other species present, is rated as an 8. It is not a targeted species, but it is the other woody species present on the Duncan Spade Ranch. So if we visualize this, we see McCartney Rose is down at low resistance. So we need a prescribed fire that will exceed its intent with an intensity above its resistance value. And mesquite is a very high resistance. So a prescribed burn in a winter is generally a low to moderate intensity. So we should see no effect on mesquite, but we should see an effect on rose. So we should see top kill of rose, no top kill of mesquite. I've done the same thing for resilience. And so both species here are very resilient. They both resprout and they both have pretty good competitive ability. And so we'll visualize that as well. So we can see rose is very highly resilient. So we need a very frequent fire regime. Key thing I'll point out here is that even though the regime frequency might be enough to control mesquite, the effect was not there because of the winter burn. So we should see no effect on mesquite, even though it is below the resilience threshold, because resilience has to be of impacting disturbance events. So here we have the burn regime history. And in the blue, we have percent burned, and in the red, we have the fuel load. And it seems like I didn't bring the Excel sheet, so it didn't copy this over correctly when I moved it to the laptop. I'm sorry, apologize for that. But the takeaway I want you to take from this is that 12, 13, 14, we have around a quarter of the ranch being burned every year with a lower fuel load. This is around 500 kilograms per hectare. And then we move to 2015, 16, and 17, around a half the ranch is being burned, but with a increased fuel load. This is around 1,000 kilograms per hectare. And then, and this is because a management decision was made in 2015 to increase the regime effect, to increase the frequency that we're burning and the amount of land that was being burned. And to do that, we had to reduce stocking back to the original stocking rate of 2012 because stocking rate had crept up as the herbaceous forage was improving. The stocking rate kept creeping up. The manager saw, there's grass here. I can graze this. I've got cows that are hungry. And so we returned back to the 160 cows in 2015 and increased the regime effect. So now let's look at some results. So this is our before image. This is before we started working with the ranch in 2010. And so here, the red is woody vegetation and the green is grassland. So this is all of the open areas. And you can see there's quite a lot of McCartney Rose cover here. So the vast majority of all this is McCartney Rose. There's some mesquite present in the southwest portion of the ranch because that area is it's higher than the rest of the ranch because this is coastal prairie, so it's very flat. And they fed hay there, and so that's why the mesquite's there is partly the hydrology and then partly that's where the cows were always fed. So now let's look at 2012. So this is the first one where we see some management effect. So this is following the drought of 2011. And in the fall, there was severe overgrazing in the fall of 2011. And so when it started raining in the spring of 2012, they had a bumper weed crop. There was euthymia everywhere. So what you're seeing in that pink this pink color, that is sprayed dicot vegetation. So if there is small McCartney Rose, the boom sprayer ran over, they got top killed, and it's showing up as purple with the euthymia. So the rose can't be separated from the euthymia in this photograph. But from being there,
Northwest was not sprayed.
yes, in the northwest. So you can see the one spot that doesn't have any purple, that pasture didn't get sprayed because there was a cotton field next to it. So this is sort of an aberration in the images because this is the only image where there was broadcast herbicide application. And this is the initial treatment because of the weeds. Needed some grass for the cows to graze on. So we moved to 2014. So this is before we made that management decision to increase the regime intensity. And so you can see that it looks similar to the 2010 image. Some stuff is changing. There's been some fire, but you still have a lot of woody. It doesn't look like it's changed very much. So now let's look at 2016. So this is after we've increased in 2015. So you've had a lot more fire going on the landscape. And these two photographs look different. You can see that the amount of cover is changing. So now we move to the last photograph we have. Now this photograph is different because it was taken in November, so it is not a summer photograph. And because it was taken in late November in 2018, mesquite was senesced. And so now you can see mesquite being present, and I've left it unseparated from the other woody plants because I could separate it at a high accuracy. And so the little blue dots that you see are areas of mesquite. And with the key area photographs, they'll show you that the mesquite cover really hasn't changed. So this pattern of mesquite is basically what they had in 2010. But overall, we're seeing a lot less woody cover being present. So now these are the numbers for these classifications of the different categories. In red, we have our woody, and in green, we have our non-woody. So you can see we go at 25%, we move to 25%, and then we drop down to 14% and then 5%. So you can really see when that regime changed in 2015 that the values for how much woody cover was present, it did shift in response to the regime. For our line transect data, I would like to show you an excerpt of it with the remote sensing data. So the remote sensing that says 12 would be 10 or 14 because they're the same. And so we begin with 16% line intersect cover, and we move down to 8% line intersect cover. So even though these numbers don't match each other, the direction of change is the same. So we have confirmed that so these methods are in agreement in the trend that the cover is going on the ranch. So lastly, I'd like to look at some key area photographs. So let's lean and see how it changed. So first I'll begin with mesquite. And you can see from 2012, 14, and then 18, mesquite doesn't look like it's changed. We're seeing herbaceous change here. We're seeing some herbaceous succession where the the forage cover is improving here. You can see some changes in McCartney rows in this photograph, but there's not a lot to begin with. And what you see is under the mesquite trees. But it looks like some of that McCartney rose is going away. So you could say this photograph shows no change in mesquite and some change in McCartney rose. And then let's look at an area that has a lot of McCartney rose. So we can see in 2012 that this is a very dense hedge of McCartney rose. It covers the photograph. And we move to 2014. You can see where those patterns are in the ground. You can see if there's McCartney rose was there. And I can tell you from walking there that it's still there in the ground. That if you look closely, you can see little bits of McCartney rose, the things that the net pattern that doesn't look like herbaceous or weeds, it's McCartney rose. But if we move to 2018, we can really see that succession is starting to happen in this pasture. That the islands of where the woody plants are, they're starting to fill out. Excuse me. And you're seeing that it's really hard when you walk through this, that you don't actually see McCartney rose down in the ground. You look down at your feet. It's very hard to find it. You might find little ones, but it's not easy to find them. So all monitoring methods here showed that the disturbance regime was reducing woody plant encroachment. And they confirmed the disturbance regime management predictions. For example, our resistance prediction of no effect on mesquite, but an impact on rose was confirmed. In that photograph, we could see that mesquite didn't look like it changed, but you could see that the McCartney rose hedge was gone. For resilience, the remote sensing data does a great job of showing this, that we've gone from 25% cover down to around 5 to 6% cover. So we can see that the amount of cover is decreasing with the regime. Within this, adaptive management is critical, and adaptive management requires the relative monitoring. The photo points were particularly useful because they were quick and easy to take. And they were the most likely thing that a manager would use if he was implementing this type of management to monitor the effects, because it is easy to go to the same place and take a photograph on the same direction every year. The feedback that we used for monitoring was critical because that is what enabled us to change the disturbance regime in 2015. So we have the lower grazing so we could have the fuel continuity and quantity necessary to have the successful prescribed fires. And part of what allowed us to do that make that decision in 2015 is because the owner had a vision. He said, I want this. I want an area that does not have McCartney Rose that is the dominant woody plant. He wanted it to be a grassland. And so we changed the grazing to facilitate the fire because that was the vision. So we made the management decision in line with the vision. So for our case study, we could say that the managed disturbance regime successfully reduced woody plant encroachment on the Duncan Spade. All monitoring methods showed a consistent trend in McCartney Rose cover decreasing. And we confirmed the disturbance regime management predictions for impact and no impact for McCartney Rose resilience and resistance. So to wrap everything up, adaptive management is essential for dynamic regime management. If you want to implement prescribed fire and manage grazing, you need adaptive management so you can change your decisions as you see what happens. In IRMS and disturbance regime theory, they provide an explicit process for how to do adaptive management of rangelands to manage woody plant encroachment to achieve your woody plant encroachment goals. So solving woody plant encroachment, it requires us to transform ecological knowledge about woody plant encroachment into management wisdom that can then be applied in management. Thank you very much for attending, and are there any questions?
Thank you, Philip. Par, do you have any questions?
Yeah, just a quick one. I was really interested and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And I'm Par Rawson, by the way, and I work in extension. And I was, after talking to Mort this morning, I was really interested in the implications of this for extension programs. So my question is, if you manage the wildlife component of this property, do you think that would have positive or negative impact on?
I think it would have a positive because in my view that if you're running wildlife and cattle and livestock, they need to integrate where you can design your management so that one will benefit the other, and that this can help people integrate their management. Because like with deer, we've seen that they love fire, that as it changes the landscape and that promotes species that have high quality protein and species that they like, and that you can integrate this so you can have the new stuff that you have livestock coming off the property, and then you can have wildlife
Targeted
products.
wildlife species on the Duncan Spade.
For that, it's quail habitat.
Yeah.
And that's part of why they originally did this, is because they didn't have the herbaceous area or the herbaceous structure in the habitat to be able to have quail there. And so they wanted to change. It's like a secondary thing that they wanted to do, of why they wanted to do this, because they wanted to restore the herbaceous vegetation to be a tall grass prairie that had quail, and then they wanted to control the woody plant encroachment so that their cattle operation was easier. They weren't having to spend thousands of dollars on spraying herbicide every year.
Well, was that the only reason for reducing herbicide?
No.
What was it?
Cost, and then it removes the forbs, because the broadcast herbicide for brush control, you don't have the forbs that are needed for quail or that deer like to eat in the spring. And so there's a whole ecological effect that fire has that cannot be replaced by like chaining or chemical control.
Well, and it, through managed wildlife, integrated with improved pasture, you might even enhance revenue down the road at some point. I imagine that's in there. Could be in the back of their mind. But,
Just removing that herbicide bill probably is a big way to improving your economic success.
but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Are there any other non-committee online?
Hi, Philip. This is Stephen. Can you hear me?
Yep, we hear you.
Alrighty. Well, first I want to say I thought you did a very, very good job presenting. I've heard parts and pieces, over the last year or so, and I thought you laid that out very well, content, and just it was very easy to follow, and I think you just did a good job today on that presentation. I guess my thought in now seeing the whole package that you presented is looking at this as a framework, your model IRMS, in terms of, now we have, it seems like a lot of different decision support software and based on models to components of IRMS. So we have grazing management software, we have herd management, we have different type of economic support packages, et cetera. And I'm just wanted to see what your thoughts were on taking this IRMS model and having it be a framework for a larger decision support type of software where all these other components like DRT can be built into this model in terms of someone sitting down, collecting data on their phone, sitting down at their desk and using something that could help them walk through the process of management, knowing that there's the art component, right? That we can't cover everything in decision support software, but it can maybe help folks stay on task, on track, and stay focused as to what they're going back to their vision. And I just want to kind of see what your thoughts were now and moving forward with this information within this model would be in terms of developing it and getting it in the hands of folks that and how you envision them using it.
So the way I see this being used is that this is the overall structure that rangeland management works from. And so this is the process of how the top expert managers are doing. This is what they're doing. And I see like the boxes as being, you have models that fit within them for like within resources. You could have disturbance regime theory fits in as this is how you analyze your resources to change them from your current to desired. So it's like a submodel. And things like the grazing manager, they're a submodel that fits within this process. And so I would like down the road, if this was to be able to become a computerized decision support tool, I could see this as being an overall framework and you say, okay, I have a decision, you go find the type of decision you want to make, you click on the box, it takes you down and you'll have it'll show you different decision aids, but then you can look and help you make that specific decision. But that it's not, I don't think we can integrate everything and have it all work as one model that does everything. I think it needs to be models designed and decision aids designed for targeted decisions. But how you use all those decision aids for targeted decisions, this is how you integrate them together. And for extension, I think I hope that this would be useful for extension, and because then they could take this and if people have questions, I want to do this, or I want a management plan, then this could be the template they work from. So start here, what is your vision? How do you accomplish it? Now you go out and do it, and then extension could provide support whenever people have questions of I have a problem here, how do I change this? My regime isn't working. An extension could say, hey, do this, this will help, maybe try this will see if it makes your regime work. And that they could support the application of this model, or the extension of it to the landowner. But I see this as being used by managers because management can't be one size fits all, because it has to be customized to your specific management unit. And hopefully with this, people can more easily customize their management to achieve their goals.
Thank you. That answered my questions. And again, good job.
Well, if there's no further questions, I guess we'll move to the committee and proceed with the committee.
Thank you all for attending.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks for helping him out through all this, Lindsay.
Yeah.
When you get that extension bulletin ready, send it to me.
I will. I definitely want to do an extension bulletin. It's on the list of things I want to do.
And the apps are just, that's icing on the cake.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to put the participants up on the screen?
Yeah, I'm waiting as people move that.
I guess leave the presentation open for now,
Yeah, I'm just gonna,
in case somebody wants to go back to it.
okay.
You still online, Dr. Popesky?
I am, yes.
Okay. If Philip gets this set, do you have questions then for him?
Okay, I'll leave
Give you a minute
these
to-
in the list now.
No, I'll just echo what others have already said. Really nice presentation. I enjoyed, and I like your slides, your flow charts explaining concepts, disturbance, regimes, management, vision, everything. It was very good. So well done, well prepared for your defense.
Thank you.
You have questions, Soren?
Excuse me. I don't have a whole lot of questions. I think Philip has kept us connected to his progress so far. So not too many questions. I wanted to maybe just point out some of the wording, maybe wordings that could be corrected. Philip, you kept referring to photographs even when you were showing maps.
It should be saying images, right? Classifications.
Maps is just fine. I mean, those were classified maps, okay? They're maps or classified images. You can refer to them like that rather than photographs, because you were referring to photographs when you were showing the terrestrial photographs of at different dates as well. So not really a big thing, but you know, just in case you continue presenting your results in other venues, you know, it is better to use the appropriate terminology. A bit more of a technical question is about the line transect versus the remote sensing method. You had a slide on that, and I wasn't sure I fully understood what you meant with that slide and what the comparison was. Do you know which one I'm referring to, and could you go back
Yes.
to it? Yeah, this is the one, yes.
So what I was trying to show here is, so the 2012 is the first year was when we begin sampling there. And so what I wanted to show is that even though the number, those key areas show 16% cover across the key areas for McCartney Rows, that the decrease from 16% to 8%, the trend of that decrease is the same as the 24% to 6%. So even though they're not exactly the same numbers, the trend is the same across the methods. So that's what I was trying to do. Maybe I should have a trend line, actually. That probably is what I should have put in the future. I think that might actually be a good way to do it. Just draw a trend line across each one.
Oh, okay, good. And the line transect, did you do that or you relied on someone else's? And how
I
you,
did all of them after 2013 or 14, because Josh Britt did the first one in 2012.
I did some of the early ones.
Yeah, I think I was there for all but like maybe the first year or two. I think it was like 13 or 14 when it started, whenever I actually got to go out there. So all but the first year or two is I've been seeing what I've been doing on the crew doing the stuff, because I was just an undergraduate when I first got to go out there.
and you followed the same protocols as the one in 2012?
Yes. One of
Could
the
you describe those briefly?
So those we did they had selected the key areas and they staked them with a T-post with a pole on them so we could find them. And so then would take a compass reading north, south, east, and west, and you'd lay a 100-foot line transect out, and you would walk over the line and record McCartney Rows cover wherever it intersected the line. And so we did that for each of the key areas, and then we take a photograph along each of the directions. So usually we take the photographs and then we lay out the line.
Cool, good.
We did herbaceous sampling as well with quadrats starting in 2013 or 14. But as I just don't have enough time to go into all the grazing, so I didn't even go into use that with how the herbaceous community changed. Like we have the data.
That slide was just total cover herbaceous, but we have it by species.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question about the classification method. You used the SVM. I forgot if you investigated other methods as well.
I did. They weren't quite as accurate. There were several. It handled something. It handled the rows better than the other methods. Like it would pick out areas where there was like only a few little the scattered. It picked out the scattered rows better than the other methods. Because I did try the different times. I tried a variety of things, and it's what ended up working the best. Because I would do I would stack images with the false color with the foreground image. I did occurrence, I think. Yeah, I did occurrence of band 4 of the thermal, and stacked that with the Nate photograph for the image, for the digital image, and I used but I selected the areas using that, and I found that it hit like so. I'm trying to remember the other ones I actually looked at. I think the I can't remember. If I looked at them, I know which one. There was one that was close to it, Mahobolis distance. I'm saying that wrong.
Yeah.
Yes, that one was close, but when I'd like look at the image, it seemed like they would match better if using the SVM.
Yeah, good. I think you did that even for my class project.
I think so. I think that's why I stuck with SVM, is because of the stuff I did in the class, even though I redid it multiple times over the years since the original one. Yeah,
cool. Very good. Another question I have is just a general question. What are your immediate plans and future plans? So you'll be defending now, graduating. What's next for you, short term and long term?
So short term, I want to publish these 3 papers this summer. I would like, maybe the 4th one could be the literature review. After I get the 3 ones published, maybe the literature review I could condense down as like a summary of like vegetation, of like management history of North America, like publish it in rangelands. But that's later. But first, so I want to publish this summer, like to get these papers out there and try to get publications. And as for what I'm going to do, I'm not exactly sure. I think I'm going to look. I would like an academic position, but to do that, I have to get postdocs. But I want to do. The ideal thing that I want to do is I like teaching, and I would like to use this to teach undergraduate students. But those positions are few and far between and hard to get. And so I was actually more recently been thinking about maybe using this for consulting, see if that would become something I could do. Because Lindsay teaches here, so I don't have to immediately move because we're stable right now. So as I try to publish and then look for positions, I might try to see if consulting is something I can do, because I think I could do the same thing we did at the Duncan Spade, but for other ranches. And I think that having IRMS to be able to show, I think it would lead into consulting and teaching really well. So I'd like to be able to use it. So I could put all the work into it. It would be sad not to be able to use it.
Yeah, sounds good. Best of luck with all your plans. It's funny, throughout the years, I had 2 undergrads that were doing consulting work, and one of them had a big truck with a large sign on it, Rangeland Logistics.
Yeah.
And, he was using NAPE imagery, NAPE photographs, and he was consulting with ranchers about aspects very related to what you did. prescribing even the amount of various fertilizers or treatments that they were supposed to apply. And he was doing all of that by just classifying freely downloaded aerial images and then coming up with some solutions. I thought it was very entrepreneurial and interesting.
Like, I think I could do something like that because I got the remote sensing background from the time of your classes, and that it would fit well into a management type consulting thing. So this is what you've got, and what is your vision? I could even see a slogan for it. Steigerwald visioning or Queensland visioning.
Sounds very good.
I wouldn't be opposed to a postdoc where I could apply this stuff with ranches. I think I would like that too. If I could find funding for it to be able to do a postdoc using this.
Have you looked at some postdoc opportunities from some of the funding agencies, including NSF?
I haven't looked yet because my thought was as soon as I get this done, then I'll start looking at what's out there while I publish. It's like, because I can look and do the publishing stuff. My thought was do that at the same time.
Okay. I don't have any questions right now. I may come back later, but I'll pass to someone else.
Dr. Tollison, you still on?
I am.
Do you have further questions?
I have a few. I know Philip, you and I have wrestled with this over the last couple of years and twisted and turned and, worked on your model and your graphics and everything. So I'm probably going to ask different questions then. And the first one that's kind of struck me is kind of more of a biology, ecology type of question.
Mm-hmm.
You've got your plant categories where you had the table that listed the resilience and resistance of mesquite and post oak. Yes, that one. And I realize that this is a starting point. You're working on this theory and you're building it out. But something to consider as you go forward. You've kind of got those species there listed as if they exist in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And we know that doesn't happen. So ecologically speaking, how is competition, synergy, facilitation, between species going to enter into this disturbance regime management? And should you add another layer or two to your table? And if so, what would they be?
The other layer would be to do this for the herbaceous, I think, is that because, and that you'd want, maybe it's not necessarily another layer of the table, but it's expanding this from woody only to being able to encapsulate herbaceous. So because I think like the grass is definitely, you could fit grazing and fire into this type of categorizations where you look at how resistant is this plant to fire or to repeated grazing. And I guess the other layer that you could add to this would be the one that I've struggled with is when you have varying instances of disturbance, like you have a really intense fire followed by a moderate fire. Like that's one that's harder to integrate. And so the way I've approached that is by saying impacting, and to say if it doesn't impact, no effect. Even though I think the true way with that is it does have an effect, because you could have multiple low intensity fires that change the resistance of a population. So the resistance of a population isn't static, it changes over time. And so if I could put something in here that shows as you do this regime, the characteristics of these populations change as the regime affects them. I'm not sure how I would integrate that, but I think it's something that could be useful to be able to convey to someone that's doing disturbance regime management, is that the populations change as you do your management. But I don't know, I don't have a good way to integrate that.
Go back to your bottom flow chart. Up here, the implement. Now,
Yes.
Yeah, that one right there. All the way down to the monitoring. Question. Does this chart give you a clue on how you could implement that? What you're talking about?
I guess that's the adaptive. That's like remaking a cycle. Is you show the changing at each cycle, maybe. So you could say you could track the resistance of it changing over time.
So that loop from event effect back to your future prescribed fire intensity frequency.
Mm-hmm. Because when I was thinking about that, I was thinking like mesquite, because if you do with mesquite, as it develops fire scars, it becomes more sensitive to the same intensity fire. And I was thinking, how is there a way I could handle that? And besides, in the application, I haven't found a good way.
That's the adaptive process.
I guess we may have to say some parts of this, you just have to explain how you do the adaptive process and you handle it within the adaptive management portion.
So I think the tangent you took with the answer there, and that Mort followed up on in that disturbance regime box that you have there, sort of addresses the question that I was talking about. Because obviously multiple different types follow-up rotations of those disturbances are again not going to exist in a vacuum, and they would have a combined aggregate effect over time. But bump up one more level there now to that resistance and resilience of that plant, and you've got it woody populations here. But again, think about let's go to live oak instead of post oak. And think about here in the Edwards Plateau, how many live oaks have junipers growing underneath them.
So the way I see that,
let me finish the question.
Sorry.
So how would you, at that spot in your box, account for the fact that there are going to be multiple levels of resistance and resilience that are also probably going to be dynamic as you get to the next box where you're applying multiple layers and timing and frequency of disturbance?
My answer to that is that each of those is a different population. So an area of live oaks with juniper under them are a different population than live oaks without juniper under them. But I guess I didn't really hit on that here, is what a population is. That's what I should add. I should elaborate on what a population is, because I think I can handle that and so how many populations you have of one species is dependent on the management unit, and that change it. And so a manager has to have experience to be able to identify whether that population, what is unique to make a population. But that also depends on the type of fire. So it almost seems that the population is what you categorize as a population is dependent on your planned disturbance.
Okay. Yeah.
Or the specific disturbance.
Yeah, and I think that's something, and I think you've answered the question well, and I think this will give you a framework to be able to describe each ranch and each management, each wildlife area, whatever, specifically, which goes back to the typical range management answer of any question. It depends. So yeah, this gives you the "it depends" factor that you could put in there. Let me throw you one more curve on this question. If you go all the way back up to where you're talking about the visioning and the long-term planning, you're going to run into people on some of these plants that are going to say, and I'm going to keep on with the live oak and the juniper, yeah, do whatever you want with the junipers, but you better not kill my oaks.
Yeah. Well, for that one, that's when that's like the changing the resistance. So as weather changes, like especially live fuel moisture. So I think you can target juniper specifically, look at periods when its live fuel moisture is going to be such that you can top kill those without killing the oak. So I think you can find windows by looking at saying like, how does this population's resistance change throughout the year? Or how can I change the fuel around it to change its resistance? Where you could do some of that Or you can handle, I don't want to kill the oaks, but I want to kill the juniper.
Are you limited only to grazing as a disturbance?
No, you
I
can
mean,
then
or
use mechanical, especially for juniper. You come in and do your initial. You may have lots of places may need to do mechanical as the initial clear, just because they may not be able to do the intensity of fires that are intense enough to cross that resistance threshold. And so then that becomes an economic and a social question of what do you use first almost.
We worked with a rancher on the upper James River, and he fits exactly what Dr. Tollison is saying.
Mm-hmm.
He did not like our intense fires,
Yeah.
and he did not want to do something that hurt his oaks. He hired hand labor to cut all the juniper out by hand to not disturb it. He didn't bring in a tractor.
That's expensive.
Well,
But hey, that's an option. It's his vision,
It
and
was
he
his
made
vision,
management for his
and-
vision.
let's just say they were fairly inexpensive labor.
Let me switch gears on you here. Well, it's actually kind of following on with this, sticking with the human dimension. So, Philip, what do you think is the biggest weakness in your model? What do you need to improve